So welcome to the July virtual meeting of Central Wisconsin Wild Ones. This is Paul Skowinski talking. I'm the president of the group. We have a brief update today to share on the Patch Street Prairie project, and then Keri will be talking about backyard birding with us for the remainder of the meeting. I did turn off anyone's video just to reduce bandwidth, and it just makes a better recording of the video as well. And I'll probably keep people muted as well unless you are the presenter at the time. So just to keep things running as smoothly as possible. So moving on, we have just myself and Keri, I believe, in the room. Here you can see our other officers. Ben is still going through some health challenges after his cancer treatment a couple of years ago. He's still having some more issues popping up here and there. So we're anxious to see Ben back in the room sometime soon. Paul and Karen may join in a little bit later, we'll see. So the quick update on Patch Street. This is a couple of pictures from this spring in May when Jill Zier, pictured on the left there, helped put some plants in. We had several others helping as well, and then my daughter planting a couple of milkweeds there on the right. So we had an area of crown vetch that was sprayed by the Stevens Point Forestry Department, and we had this sort of clean slate to then work with. And we put a 240, I believe, native plugs into these two areas just to augment the prairie that was already there with some more showy species. So Jill's putting in a couple of rough blazing stars there. And this is what it looked like yesterday. I drove past, and if you haven't seen this site, it really is a neat site to look at. It's about 20 to 25 feet deep from the sidewalk to the road, and then probably 150 or so feet long. So it's a sizable site, and there's a lot of things blooming in there right now. You can see some white prairie clover in the foreground here, purple prairie clover along the road, hoary vervain. There's some daisy fleabane mixed in there. There's the black-eyed Susan as well. One of the issues that we have, though, is particularly in the areas that we planted this spring, there was a lot of open soil still, and so we have some weeds that have come in there. What you see here is some crown vetch flowers, and then common ragweed is kind of dominating the right half of the photo. There's a little bit of timothy in there, and some pennycress and things like that. So a lot of annual weeds, and we really should get in there in the next couple of weeks and remove some of this weed competition so that our plugs can thrive a little bit better. So I'll be sending out an email shortly looking for help doing that. I am open on Thursday and Friday this week, and Saturday morning as well. So if you're interested in helping out, excuse me, to remove some of these weeds, I'm guessing it'd probably take maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours if we have 2 or 3 people there. If we have more than that, then it'll take less time. And we'll just put all these weeds into a couple of large tote containers or something, and I can just haul them home and drop them off at the compost site here in town. But if we allow a lot of this competition to thrive, it's not only going to make the site kind of look ugly, but also reduce the success of the plugs that we put in. So if you are interested, and you know you're already interested in one of those days, if you want to just throw that in the chat and let me know right away, that'd be great. Otherwise, I'll send out an email later and ask anybody for their interest. So after that brief update, we'll get right into the birding presentation with Keri. Keri is our vice president of the group here, and she's also a member of the Northeast Wisconsin Birding Club, a birding enthusiast, and she's going to share some fun facts and ID tips for birding in your backyard. So Keri, you can go ahead and share your screen. I'll stop my sharing. There we go.
Okay. Can everybody hear me and see the screen okay?
I see it and hear you just fine, Keri.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, so thanks for joining me tonight as I express my profound enthusiasm for birding, bird watching, and bird conservation. Like Paul said, I'm your vice president, and I've also been birding or bird watching for over 15 years. I got into it because my mother is an avid birder. She's been to Alaska, we've been to Arizona, she's been to Mexico, and so I just kind of fell into it naturally that way. I don't know why my screen isn't moving forward. There we go. Okay, so in Wisconsin, we are home to over 300 species of birds and host nesting habitat for neotropical spring migrants. So that would be anything that you're seeing coming through in the spring, nothing year round. What we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about common birds that are seen most likely in both rural and urban areas, and then I'm going to give you some tips on how to identify the birds. And we're going to listen to some songs as well. So there's four main methods to identifying birds. And as you can see, that's a picture of my mom looking up a song in her bird app when we were birding this spring. But the methods that you can use, of course, are sight, song, place, and behavior, and we're going to go through all four of those as well. So when you're looking at a bird, I know most of the time it's just a flash, at least in the spring when you're looking at warblers. You know, in your backyard when you're looking at birds that are hanging around your feeder, you might have more time to ask these questions. What color was it? How big was the bird? Was there a specific shape to their beak? Are there wing markings? Or is there a different breast color? Is it all one color? If you have a book that you're looking at or an app that you're looking at, those are all important things to take into consideration when you're trying to identify a bird just by sight. Because let's face it, the birds aren't always singing, so it's hard to identify by song all the time. And then of course, you have song. So when birds are starting to come back in March and April and half of May, we have the benefit of not having a lot of leaves on the trees. So we can very readily see which bird is singing. You know, when the trees start leafing out and there's more vegetation, then of course it's much more difficult to identify by sight. So one of the most enjoyable parts of bird watching for me is birding by song, where you just are in a particular area and you are listening to what's around you. It takes a lot of practice, and I highly encourage you to just be outside and try to pick up on different songs that you're hearing. So the bird here in this photo is a common yellowthroat. It's a neotropical migrant so it's a warbler, and they like to hang around water. And their song sounds like, so it's a mnemonic device that I've picked up through my years of birding, and their song sounds like witchity, witchity, witchity. So that would be sort of a mnemonic device that you could use to identify their song. Or in the case of the chickadee, they say cheeseburger. That's kind of their song. They also, of course, say chickadee dee dee. So they're saying literally what they are. I mean, how much more simple can you get? There's also ear training exercises that I typically will refresh probably around beginning of March or later March. There's Who Cooks for Poor Sam Peabody and the Peterson ear training exercises. So those are the two recordings that I highly recommend if you are interested in identifying birds by song. And because I am a lifelong lover of music, I have to also add in there that, you know, you have to take into consideration what the intonation of the bird song is. Is it low? Is it high? Is it warbling? Is there trilling? Is it buzzy? Does it sound like a flute? Those are all good things to think about when you're trying to identify a bird by song. Of course, another thing that you want to think about when identifying is, where did you see the bird? Was it at the tippy top of the tree, singing its heart out? Was it in shrubby vegetation, which is where a lot of warblers like to hang out? Was it near water? Was it under a tree? Was it on the ground foraging? So this bird in this picture here is a fox sparrow. And you'll usually see them under trees doing what I call the chicken scratch. So they kind of hop on their legs and they're looking for seeds or insects in the ground. But that's typically where you'll see them. And then of course, when was it seen? Was it seen or heard in the late evening? Was it seen or heard in the early morning? If you're going out bird watching, specifically to find warblers that are passing through, they get up very early. Usually when the sun hits the tippy tops of the trees and the insects start coming out is when those birds, when you'll start seeing those birds. They start singing about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. And then of course, in the late evening, if you're in your yard and you're enjoying some time outside, sometimes you can hear more evening birds. I've been noticing in my own yard that the wood thrush that's resident in my yard enjoys singing between 4 and 6:30 or 7 o'clock p.m. And then usually around 7:30 or 8, that's when the whippoorwill starts singing. So it's nice to kind of have that. It's very reliable. You can rely on those birds to sing when they're supposed to be singing. And then bird behavior. So this is a picture of a palm warbler, and it's the only warbler that pumps its tail when it's in the tree. So is the bird pumping its tail? Is it jumping from branch to branch very quickly? Is the bird skittish or is it friendly? I'd like to take this moment to point out that if there's a bird that's in my yard and I can't identify it because it's not singing, I'll do what's called pishing. And I don't know if anyone has ever heard of that phrase before or have seen it or have done it themselves, but it's a noise that you make with your mouth, and it's thought to kind of make the bird think that there's something going on that they need to come check out. So you can very easily pish a chickadee from, if it's hiding in a juniper tree, you can easily pish it down because chickadees are a very friendly bird. So what that sounds like is, I'll demonstrate it for you. It sounds like this. And it's just this nice pishing sound that kind of brings the bird a little bit closer to you so you can get a better look at it. So I'm going to take you through spring and summer birds, fall and winter birds, and then birds that are commonly seen year-round. So we'll start with the spring and summer birds. So this is the Baltimore Oriole. You probably will see Mr. and Mrs. hanging out in your yard. They love elm trees. They'll usually be singing from the treetops in mixed deciduous forests. They love insects, berries, and nectar. This year was the first year that I had 2 nesting pair in my yard. And they probably came around, I would say, 2nd or 3rd week of May. Well, the birds were a little bit on the later side this year because of some colder weather that we had. But I set up a half an orange and a little bit of jelly. It didn't even need to be grape jelly. And they were on that all the time. So it was really neat to see. So I was just going to try and see if I can play their song. So they have this lovely, flute-like kind of song that is just beautiful to listen to. I know that Paul has one in his neighborhood too. It's one of my favorites. and so beautiful. So this is a house wren. They usually come around the same time, second or third week of May, maybe even a little bit earlier, but they love like wood and brush piles, shrubby brush. They're usually hanging around the mid-tree line. They'll usually come back every year to the same spot to nest. So if you have one in your yard this year, you know you're going to probably have you know, the same family coming back year after year. They love to eat insects as well as spiders and snails. So I'll play you their song now. So the house wren is a bird that is very common throughout Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, we also have a winter wren. Now, you don't see them as often as you do house wrens. Those are particularly, at least in my experience, I've only seen them near water or on the sides of cliffs. I don't know why, but that's kind of where they seem to hang out. They're a little particular about their habitats. But that's also a very beautiful bird that, that you should check out if you have the interest to do so. So this is an eastern bluebird. They love open fields with scattered trees and open pine woods. Just the most beautiful blue feathers I think I've ever seen. So if you have kind of an open prairie or an open field next to you, you'll most likely be seeing an eastern bluebird. They love mealworms. So if you if you know that you have bluebirds near your house and you want to provide some extra food for them, you can buy mealworms as bird food, and it's just a little bag and it's got these dried mealworms in them, and you can put them in a dish or in a bird feeder and they'll come and snack on them. So here, I'll play their song. So here you kind of notice that their song is it's almost like screechy sort of, but it's not real high, it's not real low, it's right in the middle. So you know, it's when you're birding and you're trying to identify by a song, it's kind of interesting to notice where the song actually lives musically. This is a brown thrasher, very common in Wisconsin. I'm just going to note this, my dad's favorite bird. They usually hang out in the shrubby underbrush, most likely being seen on the ground foraging for insects, but they will sing from the treetops or mid-canopy. Usually when I see them singing, they are either hidden or they're way off in the distance, buried at the tippy tops of the tree. They like to eat insects, berries, and nuts. So before I play the song, I just want to point out that brown thrashers are in the mockingbird family, and they repeat their song twice. So if they hear something, they'll repeat it twice, and then they'll repeat another song twice, and then they'll repeat another song twice. So when I play it, you'll notice that it's the same sound 2 times in a row, and that's always how I know that it's a brown thrasher, because it's very easy to get it mixed up with a catbird. They just have the most lovely sound and so beautiful, very reddish, brownish with this kind of mottled chest and a bright yellow eye. They're amazing to look at. So this is an Indigo Bunting, another common bird that you can see in Wisconsin in your backyard. Another beautiful spring bird that comes around and then usually, you know, disappears when nesting and then comes back and starts singing again. You'll see them in brushy pastures, bushy forest edges, and they love to eat seeds and insects like most birds do. In my experience this spring, I haven't seen a lot of indigo buntings, but I have heard them. So I know that they're around, but they've been a little secretive this year. I'm not sure why. So I'll play you their song. I'm sure that you've probably heard that song a million times and thought, you know, oh, it sounds really similar to a goldfinch, but it's not. It's this indigo bunting and this beautiful bluebird. So we'll move on to fall and winter birds. These are the 5 most commonly seen fall and winter birds that migrate down from Canada to follow their food source, and then they go back up north in the spring to nest. They vacation here for winter. Isn't that funny? Okay, so the dark-eyed junco, my mother and I make a joke about the junco because whenever the juncos arrive, usually in October roughly, we start to get kind of sad because that's when all of the spring birds are gone and we're going to be stuck with juncos for 6 months. But you'll usually see them foraging on the ground with a lot of other juncos, usually in mixed conifer and deciduous forests. They, again, like to eat seeds and insects. I try to pay attention to when the juncos come in and they're all foraging on the ground, because sometimes other birds like to hang out in those clusters, and we'll get to that kind of later on. But if I see one junco, I usually see about 20, and I try to pay attention to what else is in that flock. So we'll listen to their song. So it's kind of a dry trill, if you can kind of pick that out. It's really easy to get it confused with a house finch, but once you've seen a purple finch, you know that it looks, from the bird watching guides that I have, it looks like a house finch dipped in raspberry juice. So they're very red, and their whole body is red, whereas a house finch is just a little bit red. So they're usually seen foraging on the ground. They will come to your feeders. They're seen in mid-canopy and in shrubs, and they're down in Wisconsin to eat the seeds and the berries and the insects. And they're a beautiful bird. We don't really get to see them that often because if they have a food source that is further north, then we sometimes won't get to see them, but they're beautiful to look at. So typically when I'm seeing a purple finch, I'm not hearing them sing because it's winter, and usually no one except a chickadee is singing in the wintertime. So the common redpoll, this little guy forages on the ground. He's in trees, in shrubs, and then he's with other member of a flock, and he will show up at your feeder on the ground. So when I'm filling my feeders, I know this might attract squirrels, and I'm totally fine with that, but I will fill my feeders and then I'll sprinkle a little bit on the ground as well for the ground feeders, and this is one of them, as well as juncos, cardinals. Blue jays will also forage on the ground, especially in the winter. They need a little bit more help because they're relying on seeds for their food source. So like it says, they eat mostly seeds and some insects. And this is one of those birds that I'll see in a mixed flock. So, they'll be mixed in with finches, they'll be mixed in with juncos. So you really have to kind of keep an open eye on for these little birds, and they are very cute. So this is a snow bunting. Probably you will not see them in your backyard, but if you're paying attention while you're driving to kind of your surroundings, you might see a giant flock of snow buntings flying over open fields in the wintertime. Over the years, I have noticed that snow buntings tend to be, I guess, more fluid in their movements right before it snows. So I'll usually see snow buntings in a giant flock flying over open fields like a day or two before it snows, which is very interesting to me. And I'm not sure that there's scientific data to back that up, but that's just been my experience. And of course, they like to eat seeds and mostly insects. And again, I typically don't hear them singing, but I do see them as they're flying in this giant mob of other buntings. It's just a lovely sight to see. This is a pine siskin. If you'll notice, the beak is incredibly razor thin. So it looks a lot like a goldfinch, like an American goldfinch, but the big difference is that their beaks are incredibly thin right at the point. So they're seen again in mixed flocks. So that's another one where you could potentially see it in a flock of juncos or in a flock of redpolls, or vice versa, a redpoll in a pine siskin flock, something like that. They will come to your feeders. I had one or two come to my feeders last winter, and they hang out in conifers. They feed on alder seeds, birch, and spruce. So I love their song because I can always pick it out when I'm, in a forest or if I'm snowshoeing or something like that, because their song sounds like a zipper going up. It's like zip, and I always know that there's a pine siskin hanging around somewhere if I can hear that song. Okay, so we're going to move on to birds that are in Wisconsin that you might see in your yard year-round. So this is a tufted titmouse. They're very active, bouncy little creature. They're seen in the tops of conifers and deciduous forests. They will drop on the ground to feed. They will eat suet, seeds, and insects, of course, in the summer. This past year was the first year that I had a tufted titmouse overwinter in my neighborhood. And I don't know if anybody is familiar with a gentleman named Bob Welch. He lives near me, and he bands birds, and he does all kinds of climbing of trees and banding ospreys, and he's very active in the scientific community and in the birding community. But he said that he's had tufted titmice over winter for the past 3 winters, which is cool because we get to see this beautiful tufted titmouse whose song is just delightful. But also it's kind of sad because we know that climate change is affecting where our birds are hanging out and where they're living. So I'm just gonna play you this guy's song. So the tufted titmouse has this very iconic sounding song, but if you listen, you could hear it saying Peter, Peter, Peter. It's not always that slow. Sometimes it's Peter, Peter, Peter. But that's their #1 song that I'm hearing every day throughout the year. Downy woodpecker, I think, we all can identify a downy. Of course, there's multiple woodpecker species in Wisconsin. This is the smallest one with a little red notch on the back of his head. But they hang out in tree trunks, large weed and shrub stalks, mixed forest and urban areas. You usually see these guys hanging out in parks too. And they'll eat insects, seeds, nuts, and suet. And actually, they eat suet year-round. So I know sometimes people typically put the suet out in the wintertime and only in the wintertime, but it's important to have suet out year-round so that birds can eat and get their fat and protein content too. So I'll play you his song. Okay. This is the American Goldfinch, beautiful yellow bird with black wings and a black little top on its head. So seen in weedy shrubs, trees, feeders, foraging in flocks. You know, they go through a molting phase in the spring and in the fall. So they hang out year round, but they are not this yellow, of course. In the wintertime, they're very drab and brown. And when they are getting ready to nest and to find a mate, that's when they molt and they become yellow again. So I'll play you their song. So I'm just going to point out for this American Goldfinch, I call this the potato chip bird because when he sings that particular song, it sounds like he's saying potato chip, potato chip, potato chip, potato chip, and he's usually, that's the song that they're singing when they're flying through the air. And they usually have kind of a curved up, curved up, curved up flight pattern. So I'll play it for you again, and then you tell me if you can pick out the potato chip. So that's the American Goldfinch, aka potato chip bird. This is a Redbreasted Nuthatch, small bird, very pointy beak, kind of like these racing stripes on their head, red breast, of course, seen climbing up and down the tree trunks of coniferous forests. They eat seeds, nuts, and suet year-round as well. So, and of course, there's the white-breasted nuthatch, which is considerably bigger. But this is the song of the red-breasted nuthatch. And lastly, we have black-capped chickadees, of course. They forage on branches in mixed forests. They like to eat seeds, insects, and berries. This is the bird that I was talking about earlier, where their song sounds like cheeseburger, and then, of course, chickadee, where they're actually telling you what they are. So you can hear cheeseburger, cheeseburger. Great bird. And I will add here that the only bird I've ever heard singing when it's minus 20 degrees outside. So it's always nice to hear when it's so cold. So I just wanted to add a few slides about bird conservation. There's a quote up that says, "The time to protect a species as wild is still common." These are pictures of my children doing bird banding activities this past May. So we were out at Bob Welch's biological field station in Wapaka, and he has mist nets that he puts up around his property, and the birds fly into it. We find the birds, we put the birds into those little white bags. You can see my daughter there holding one, and bring it back to the station, and then we find the band. Bob helps identify the type of bird, he sexes the bird, so male or female, and then if it's first year, second year, things like that. So and then he records the information, and that gets sent off to wherever he sends it to. So and then you have Sam here, who's holding an oriole in his hand. It's pretty great to be able to hold a bird in your hand. And then, of course, we release it, which is the best part, knowing that we've contributed to bird conservation and science. It's a pretty great feeling. So a small note here on bird populations. So the bird populations continue to decline because, of course, habitat loss and climate change. The forest birds, so these would be wood thrushes, warblers, and the grassland birds, think meadowlark, bobolinks, have declined by 2.9 billion since 1970. That's 1 in 4 birds. That's a huge decline and really troubling. The common birds that we typically see are becoming less common. And there are ways that we can help to mitigate some of the population loss. Of course, reducing your lawn and increasing your insect populations, which is their main food source, by planting natives in your yard versus ornamentals or annuals. Keep your cats indoors. Outdoor cats kill more birds than any other non-native threat. There's a lot of feral cats out there, and there's a lot of pet owners who are letting their cats roam around outside, which is just really detrimental to bird populations. And of course, avoiding pesticide use and consumption in your foods, and using less plastic. So here are some recommendations and resources that I recommend if you are interested in becoming more of a bird watcher. For binoculars, I recommend the Vortex brand. The lifelong warranty comes with the binoculars. The glass quality is superior. And I will tell you that their warranty comes in really handy. I bought my binoculars 14 years ago. And just this past spring, right before migration picked up, they fell from a very high place and broke in 2 pieces. And I went on the Vortex website, I filled out a form, I sent it in a box, and they sent me a brand new pair of binoculars because they couldn't fix the ones that I had bought. And that's pretty amazing when you think about it. And that's not something that you have to pay for, it just comes with the binoculars. The ear training exercise recordings that I had mentioned earlier, the Peterson ear training and Who Cooks for Poor Sam Peabody, you can buy those on CD. Of course, there's also apps as well that you can check out. There's the Sibley app, which is what I have on my phone. But if you want to get more into birding by ear so that you can identify what's in your yard, I recommend those CDs. As far as books go, like guidebooks, I recommend and I prefer the Coffin Guide to Eastern U.S. Birds. There is the Peterson Guide, and of course there's National Geographic and things like that, but I feel like the Coffin Guides do a really nice job of accurately representing what you're seeing in the field. I've been a member of the Northeast Wisconsin Bird Club. Under normal circumstances, we do meet at Mosquito Hill, and all of their updates are on Facebook. If you want to become a member, it's incredibly reasonable to do so. I want to say that the membership fee is $10 a year. So look into joining that because it's a great resource for beginner bird watchers and bird watchers of all experience. So the Cornell Lab for Ornithology, that's where I got a lot of my information for this presentation. If you want to learn more, my recommendation is just get out into the field and go birding. The best way that you can learn is by doing. And then record your findings on eBird, which is an app that you can download onto your smartphone if you have one. But you can help ornithologists and bird conservationists by recording your findings. And you can also, if you're in the mood for finding a particular bird or finding out which rare birds are popping up around Wisconsin, that would be recorded on that platform as well. So which natives are good for birds? Insects make up the majority of the bird's diet, including caterpillars, which are the preferred food for nestlings. They have a really high protein content. Oak species, of course, produce the greatest number of insects and caterpillars. Berries and nuts, of course, also make up bird diet. So serviceberry, juneberry, currant, elderberry, And burr and white oak are also good options, and then the winterberry and sumac in the winter. Joe Pyeweed, black-eyed Susan, coreopsis, ironweed, purple coneflower, they all host a lot of great caterpillar species for the birds to eat. And then, of course, remove your toxic invasives. So I'd make a plug there for that. Any questions? I know it was long and there's lots of information.
I have a few questions for you, Keri.
Okay.
I'm wondering, you mentioned the tufted titmouse, how you, or I think it was Bob who said he's been seeing them nesting over the, or sorry, not nesting, but staying here over the winter for the last few winters.
Yeah.
Are there other birds that you're noticing in your 15 years of birding that are no longer being seen or becoming more or less abundant in your area?
So this was the first year in 15 years that I did not see a meadowlark, and that really concerns me. Just because we're losing a lot of our grasslands. You know, the meadowlark is a beautiful bird and its song is unforgettable. And so to not have that experience of seeing one every year when you've seen one, you know, for the last 15 years, it's really, really concerning. So the other bird that I was seeing a lot more of when I was first starting to bird watch and now no longer see is a bobolink. That's another grassland bird. So a lot of our grasslands are being converted into farm fields or cash crops, or just being plowed for subdivisions as well. So, you know, that's at least what I've been noticing.
Okay. I have a couple others, but I'll give others a chance to ask questions, and I'm going to pull the screen back to the closing slide while I'm doing that.
Okay. No questions. That means I answered everybody's questions without even knowing it.
Well, I have a couple others. What are your favorite birds?
Ooh, that's a great question. Well, I have a favorite warbler, and that is a blue-winged warbler. I have had the blue-winged warbler nest in my yard, which is an amazing gift. The bird is mostly yellow with, of course, bluish grayish wings, and then it has kind of this like black eye stripe through its eye, and when it sings, it sounds like it's snoring. So the song is like bee buzz, and it sounds like it's kind of taking a nap. It sounds like it's snoring. It's just this beautiful, delightful bird. So I would say that's probably my favorite bird.
Cool. My last question was regarding the picture you showed of the goldfinch. I stole your screen sharing ability, so sorry about that. But there was a picture of a goldfinch that was eating a thistle seed, and the seed had these long hairs sticking out of it, of course, that are attached to seeds of thistles. Does the goldfinch eat those hairs as well, or does it trim the seed off?
My guess, and this is just based on experience, not on any kind of scientific data, but is they're only eating the seed. So they're using their beak and they're using whatever they're perched on to knock the seed off of those little hairs. And you'll see if you observe other birds doing the same kind of thing. I'll watch. I have a feeder that's just for whole peanuts, so that would be unshelled peanuts. And I'll watch as blue jays take the entire thing out and fly somewhere and then just knock the heck out of it just to get that little nut out of there. And so, you know, that's what the birds are doing. They're after the seed.
Okay, that's what I figured. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Keri?
I see Bob Olson raised his hand.
Bob, you're welcome to unmute yourself or type it into the chat. All right, we do have a couple of questions in the chat. Faith was wondering about cedar waxwings. Do you want to just talk about those for a minute?
Sure. So cedar waxwings are common in our area. They have a very specific song. They kind of sound like they're saying, see, 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 a very, very high-pitched sound. And they'll hang out with flocks. They have like a little yellow stripe at the end of their tail. And of course, they have the crest on the top of their head. But they hang out year round, although I would say I see more cedar waxwings in the spring and summer months than I do in the winters, but they do hang around year round. But yeah, they're a great bird too.
I see Bob is unmuted now. Bob, go ahead and ask a question.
I think I'm unmuted.
Yes.
Have you heard any whippoorwills this year?
I have heard whippoorwills this year. So I live in Wapaka, and I live in a rural area. I live in the town of Dayton, and I've been hearing. I just had one not last night, but the night before, singing very close to my house, and they're pretty reliable, thankfully, at least in my general area. The other bird that I saw this year in my yard for the first time, well, I didn't see it, but I heard it, was an American woodcock. And I don't know if anyone is familiar with that kind of bird, but they are always on the ground typically, and they start painting right around dusk, and that's kind of their behaviors. They have this very distinct peent sound, and I heard it coming from my yard, which was very exciting for me.
Well, I'm just north of you in the town of Farmington. I've heard one whippoorwill in about the last 10 years, so I don't know what.
Wow.
They're just not here.
That's too bad. I know that. I mean, I have a whippoorwill singing just to the south of me every year. There hasn't been a year now. I've only lived out there for 6 years. And I know that there's a whippoorwill out by Bob Welch's place. He lives on Emmons Creek Road. But he always has a whippoorwill hanging around his place too. So they're around, but maybe they just moved to a different spot that's not by your house. That would be too bad.
I'll keep listening.
Good plan, Bob.
Well, Anne put a comment in the chat that maybe the goldfinch was using the down of the thistle for nesting. And she also wanted to just put in a plug for the Aldo Leopold Audubon Society chapter in central Wisconsin here. So you can go to aldoleopoldaudubon.org to find out more about joining that group. Are there any other questions for Keri?
Thanks everyone for listening to my very enthusiastic telling of backyard bird watching.
Thank you, Keri. We can tell you're passionate about the subject. It was fun to listen to you talk about it.
Thanks, Paul.
So I think pretty much everybody here is already a member of our chapter, but if you're not and you'd like to be, go to wildones.org and select our Central Wisconsin chapter when you join, and you can become part of our chapter and receive our mailings and join our field trips and our monthly meetings and so forth. Again, if there's anybody who's interested in helping with the weeding of the Patch Street site, either Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, please let me know via email or chat right now. I'll probably head over there and maybe I'll steal one of my kids for a while and have them help me out, but it'd be nice to have a few others helping out just to speed things up. So with that, that is all for tonight. So thank you for joining and have a great evening.
Thanks, Paul.